There is a silent difference between two people of the same age. One of them wakes up with energy, carries weight, thinks with clarity, sleeps deeply, ages in a way that the people around them notice without being able to explain exactly why. The other wakes up tired, slowly loses muscle, feels mental fog after lunch, has joint pain they haven't yet seen a doctor about. They're the same age on paper, but their bodies are in completely different places. If you made it this far, you probably recognize someone in that description, or you recognize yourself. This channel exists to bring exactly this kind of knowledge. What really works explained clearly, without the fluff. If you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next piece of content might be the one that changes the direction. The difference is rarely at the gym, rarely in medication. It almost always comes down to what goes into the mouth, and more specifically, to the quality of protein the body receives every day. This isn't talk from a clinic nutritionist. It's the kind of observation that comes from environments where error is costly, where the body needs to function under extreme pressure for weeks with limited resources and no margin for deterioration. High-performance operators have learned over decades that the human body is not as complicated as people think. It has basic requirements, and when those requirements are consistently met, the results are visible, measurable, and lasting. Today, we're going deep into 12 protein sources that rarely appear together in the same conversation. Some of them are ancient. Some were rediscovered by modern physiology. All of them share one characteristic. They work. Stay until the end. The item that will surprise you most is not the first one. Before talking about the foods, it's important to understand what happens when the body doesn't receive enough protein or when it receives low-quality protein. Most people think of protein as something for people who want to build muscle. This association has created a massive error. Protein is not an athlete's nutrient. It is a survival nutrient. The body uses amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, to produce enzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, antibodies, and to maintain the structure of every cell in the organism. When the supply is insufficient, the body begins a silent process. It breaks down muscle to extract the amino acids it needs. This causes no pain, no alarm. It happens slowly over months and years. Aging physiology researchers have extensively documented this phenomenon. They call it sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle mass that begins, on average, after the age of 35. And it is not inevitable. It is in large part the result of an insufficient supply of quality protein over time. Elite operators understand that muscle mass is not aesthetics. It is metabolic reserve. It is recovery capacity. It is well-regulated insulin. It is a functioning immune system. It is protected cognition. And that is exactly why the choice of protein sources matters so much. Think of it this way. The body you'll have at 60 is being built right now. Every meal is an engineering decision. Modern high-performance protocols were not developed in comfortable clinics. They were developed in situations where the body needs to function with limited resources in adverse environments over prolonged periods and still maintain reasoning, strength, and resilience. What specialists in these environments discovered is that protein quality surpasses quantity, and that diversity of sources, especially sources with complementary amino acid profiles, produces results that no single source can achieve on its own. It's not about consuming more protein. It's about consuming the right protein in the right combination with consistency. The 12 foods we'll explore today were selected based on 3 criteria that human performance specialists use: real nutritional density, amino acid bioavailability, and long-term metabolic sustainability. In other words, how much the body actually absorbs, how much it can use, and how much that choice contributes to health over decades, not just the next few weeks. Let's begin. Underscore. Food 1, lentils. Most people look at lentils and think vegetable, carbohydrate, basic. That is the mistake. The lentil is one of the oldest protein sources humanity has known, and there's a reason it has survived in the diets of radically different cultures across millennia. Field nutrition specialists, the kind of nutrition that needs to work when there is no refrigerator, when the weight of a load is a factor, when food needs to be dense and durable. Note that the lentil delivers something few foods can: protein and soluble fiber in the same package. What the science says: 100 grams of cooked lentils contain approximately 9 grams of protein, with an amino acid profile that includes lysine in relevant quantities, an amino acid that many plant sources have in low concentrations. The fiber in lentils feeds the gut microbiota, and there is a direct, well-documented connection in gastroenterology between a healthy microbiota and serotonin production, systemic inflammation, and cognitive clarity. The benefits go beyond muscle. Lentils have a low glycemic index, meaning they do not cause the insulin spikes responsible for the fatigue many people feel after lunch. They sustain energy consistently. An important detail: lentils contain natural antinutrients, lectins and phytates, which can reduce mineral absorption when consumed raw or without proper preparation. Soaking for a few hours before cooking resolves this problem simply and effectively. Practical application: lentils don't need to be the main dish. They work as a base for soups, as a side to animal proteins, or as an ingredient in cold preparations. What matters is regular presence, not the quantity per meal. Food 2. Fish. Few foods on the planet have a scientific dossier as extensive as fish. And yet, a small fraction of the population consumes fish with a frequency that would justify that dossier. Cardiovascular and neurological physiology researchers have documented for decades what happens in populations that consume fish regularly versus those that do not. The differences are not marginal. What makes fish unique as a protein source? Fish protein is of high biological value, meaning the amino acid profile closely approximates what the human body needs for tissue synthesis. But what sets fish apart from other animal sources is the fat that accompanies it. Omega-3 fatty acids, especially EPA and DHA, are structural components of brain tissue. They participate in the regulation of inflammation, the fluidity of cell membranes, and the synthesis of neurotransmitters. In other words, when you consume fatty fish regularly, you are simultaneously rebuilding muscle and nourishing the central nervous system. But there is a detail most people overlook. Not all fish deliver the same package. Small fish, sardines, mackerel, herring, concentrate omega-3s and have lower accumulation of heavy metals because they are lower on the food chain. Large predatory fish also have omega-3s, but can accumulate mercury in relevant amounts when consumed in excess. The ideal frequency, according to longevity specialists, is 2 to 3 portions per week. The type of fish matters less than the regularity. Do you notice how everything is connected? We're talking about protein, but we are, in fact, talking about inflammation, about cognition, about insulin, about microbiota, about neurotransmitters. The body does not operate in separate departments. Every dietary choice has consequences that ripple through systems you never imagined were being affected. And this is where most people go wrong. They look for a food that is good for one thing, while high-performance protocols look for foods that move multiple systems simultaneously. The next items on our list will make this even clearer. Understand Food 3. Lamb. Lamb rarely appears in modern nutrition conversations. That is a significant gap. Lamb is one of the most nutritionally complete foods that exists. Not because the industry promotes it, but because the physiology of the animal and the way it feeds, pasture, herbs, constant movement, produce a nutritional composition that grain-fed beef rarely achieves. What sets lamb apart? Beyond the high biological value protein, with all essential amino acids in adequate proportions, pasture-raised lamb contains conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, a fat that metabolism researchers associate with the reduction of body fat and improvement of muscle composition. It is also rich in zinc, selenium, and heme iron, minerals directly involved in hormonal production, immunity, and oxygen transport. The creatine present in red meat, including lamb, deserves special attention. It is a compound the body naturally produces, but in limited quantities. Dietary creatine intake has a direct impact on muscular strength and, surprisingly, on cognition. Recent studies show improvement in short-term memory tasks in people who regularly consume creatine. Caveats: lamb is a meat with a relevant saturated fat content. This is not a problem when it is part of a balanced diet, but it becomes a factor to consider in people with a cardiovascular history. Moderation and the origin of the animal, pasture versus confinement, make a real difference in the final nutritional composition of the product. Practical application: once or twice a week, in less processed cuts, represents a meaningful inclusion without the risks of excess. Underscore. Food for almonds. There is a misconception about almonds that needs to be corrected before anything else. Almonds are not a snack. Almonds are a high-density, functional food. The distinction matters because it changes the way you think about the quantity and context of consumption. The nutritional profile of almonds is complex. They contain protein, about 6 grams per 30 grams. But what makes almonds truly special is the combination of protein with monounsaturated fat, natural vitamin E, magnesium, and arginine. Let's break that down. The monounsaturated fat in almonds is the same predominant type found in olive oil. It has documented anti-inflammatory impact. Vitamin E is a fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes, especially relevant for muscle tissue recovering after physical exertion. Magnesium is a mineral involved in more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, including cellular energy production and cortisol regulation. And arginine is an amino acid that is a precursor to nitric oxide, the compound responsible for vasodilation and adequate blood flow to muscles and the brain. In other words, almonds feed the muscle, protect the cell, and support the cardiovascular system simultaneously. What most people don't know about absorption: almonds with skin, consumed raw, have limited absorption due to phytase. Soaking overnight, or consuming them lightly toasted, considerably increases the bioavailability of nutrients. The right amount, 20 to 30 grams per day, a small handful, is enough to reap the documented benefits without exceeding caloric intake. Food 5: eggs. If there is a single food that human physiology specialists consistently place at the top of the list, that food is the egg. Not the protein powder supplement, not the finest cut of meat. The egg. Why? Because the egg is biologically designed to create life from scratch. That means it contains, in nearly perfect proportions, everything a cell needs to exist and replicate. Biological value of egg protein is the highest among all natural foods. Nutrition researchers use the egg as a reference to measure the protein quality of other foods. The scale is built with the egg as the maximum benchmark. This means the amino acids in the egg are absorbed and used by the body with exceptionally high efficiency. But the yolk deserves special attention. For decades, it was demonized because of its cholesterol content. What the most recent research has made clear is that dietary cholesterol has limited impact on blood cholesterol levels for most people, and that the yolk contains nutrients the egg white simply does not have: choline, lutein, zeaxanthin, vitamin D, vitamin K2, and fats that facilitate the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. Choline, in particular, is a nutrient that most people consume in insufficient quantities. It is essential for the production of acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter responsible for memory, focus, and motor control. Practical application: 2 to 3 whole eggs per day, including the yolk, represent one of the simplest, most accessible, and most effective nutritional interventions available. And if you find yourself ignoring this food for reasons you heard years ago, it may be worth revisiting where that information came from. We are at the halfway point of the list, and if you stop to observe the pattern, you will notice something important. All of these foods share one characteristic. They are not new. They were not developed in a laboratory. They have existed for centuries, in some cases for millennia, in the diets of populations that demonstrated robust physical health and above-average longevity. What changed was not the foods. What changed was what replaced them. Ultra-processed products, low-quality proteins, industrial fats, refined carbohydrates that inflame and destabilize. And the result of that substitution is visible, not in one generation, but in the trajectory of physical decline that begins silently at 30 and becomes evident at 50. Why do so few people know this? Perhaps because simple knowledge rarely generates profit for industries that depend on complexity. Let's continue. Food 6, goat meat. Goat meat is probably the most underrated item on this list, and also nutritionally interesting. While beef and chicken dominate protein conversations, goat stays off the radar for most people, especially in urban contexts. But from a nutritional composition standpoint, it presents characteristics that place it in a distinct position. What makes goat meat especially interesting? It is naturally lean. It has less saturated fat than beef, skinless chicken, and even pork in many cuts. This means you get a high protein concentration with a relatively low caloric load. The amino acid profile is complete with a highlight on leucine, the amino acid most directly associated with muscle protein synthesis. Furthermore, goats are animals that are rarely raised in intensive confinement. They are naturally adapted to grazing on varied terrain, which directly influences the composition of their meat. A greater proportion of healthy fatty acids and a lower presence of compounds resulting from chronic animal stress. Cardiovascular health researchers note that Mediterranean and Middle Eastern populations, which historically have higher goat meat consumption, show consistently favorable cardiovascular metrics in long-duration studies. It's not possible to attribute this to a single factor, but the composition of goat meat certainly enters the equation. Practical application. It can replace beef in most preparations. The flavor is slightly different, more pronounced, but the adjustment is quick. The challenge is finding it, which may require searching in fairs and specialty markets, depending on the region. Food 7, fava beans. There is a reason why fava beans appear in the diets of the so-called blue zones. Regions of the planet where the concentration of people over 100 years old is statistically unusual. That reason is not a coincidence. Fava beans are legumes with a nutritional profile that combines reasonably quality protein with bioactive compounds that rarely appear together in other foods. What the science documents about fava beans? They contain L-dopa, a direct precursor to dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation, pleasure, coordinated movement, and learning. This is not a marginal finding. It is the reason why synthetic L-dopa is the primary medication used in the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and the fava bean is one of the few natural dietary sources of this substance. In addition, fava beans are rich in folate, a B-complex vitamin essential for DNA synthesis and cardiovascular system protection, and in manganese, a mineral cofactor of antioxidant enzymes. An important warning: people with G6PD deficiency a relatively common genetic condition in Mediterranean and African populations, should avoid fava beans, as they can develop a severe hemolytic reaction. Before regularly including fava beans in the diet, especially in large quantities, consulting a healthcare professional is advisable. For most people, however, fava beans represent a high-value nutritional addition to a diet aimed at longevity and cognitive function. Food 8. Quail. Quail, both the egg and the meat, occupies an interesting space in nutrition that few people explore. In terms of size, it is modest. In terms of nutritional density, it is impressive. The quail egg has a proportionally superior nutritional profile to the chicken egg in some specific metrics. Per 100 grams, it contains more vitamin B12, more iron, more vitamin A, and more phosphorus than the chicken egg equivalent. The protein is of high quality, with a complete amino acid profile. What makes quail eggs especially relevant in recovery protocols is the combination of vitamin B12, essential for the production of red blood cells and for nervous system health, with iron in bioavailable form. For people experiencing chronic fatigue, low vitality, and difficulty concentrating, deficiency in these two nutrients is a frequent and frequently uninvestigated cause. Quail meat is equally interesting, lean, with high biological value protein and low saturated fat content. It has been widely consumed in Mediterranean and Asian diets for centuries. Practical application: 4 to 5 quail eggs are equivalent in protein to 1 chicken egg, but they deliver a slightly different micronutrient package. Including them in the routine as a variation is a nutritional diversification strategy that works. But this is still not the most interesting part. The next foods on this list are the ones that divide opinions the most. And that is exactly why they deserve special attention. Because when a food divides opinions, two phenomena are usually happening simultaneously. There is misleading information circulating, and there is truth being ignored. Let's separate the two. Food 9. Cheese and dairy. The story of cheese and dairy in modern nutrition is a study in how science can be poorly communicated with large-scale consequences. For decades, the saturated fat in dairy products was presented as a cardiovascular villain. This led to a wave of skim, semi-skim, and modified dairy products that replaced fat with sugars and additives, and produced, ironically, a product far less healthy than the original. What the most recent research shows is more nuanced. The relationship between whole dairy and cardiovascular health is not the linear cause and effect relationship that was widely communicated. Long-term cohort studies, tracking populations over decades, suggest that moderate consumption of whole fermented dairy is associated with lower risk of type 2 diabetes and stroke. Cheese, specifically, is a dense protein source with interesting characteristics. It contains casein, a slow-digesting protein that sustains muscle protein synthesis over prolonged periods. It contains calcium in bioavailable form, essential for muscle contraction, bone density, and nerve transmission. And when fermented, it contains probiotics that contribute to gut health. Fermented dairy products, whole natural yogurt, kefir, aged cheeses, have a superior nutritional profile to fresh non-fermented dairy, both in bioavailability and an impact on the microbiota. Real caveats: lactose intolerance and sensitivity to milk proteins are real conditions that affect a significant portion of the population. For these people, the benefits of dairy do not translate, and replacing them with alternative sources is the correct approach. For everyone else, cheese and whole dairy in moderation represent a quality protein source with a relevant micronutrient profile. underscore underscore. Food 10. Pistachios. Pistachios are frequently treated as entertainment, the colorful party snack. This perception conceals what is, in fact, one of the most well-documented functional foods available. What sets pistachios apart from other nuts is not just the macronutrient profile, although it is excellent, with approximately 6 grams of protein per 30 grams, along with monounsaturated fats and fiber. What sets pistachios apart is the concentration of specific bioactive compounds. They contain lutein and zeaxanthin, antioxidants that accumulate in the retinal macula and are associated with long-term vision protection. They contain resveratrol, the same compound found in red wine, associated with cellular longevity. And they contain phytosterols, compounds that compete with LDL cholesterol in intestinal absorption and have a documented effect on lipid profile regulation. Cardiometabolic health researchers note that pistachios have one of the lowest glycemic response rates among nuts, meaning they do not significantly raise insulin and can be used as a post-meal glycemic control strategy. A detail most people don't know: pistachios are one of the few foods that contain amino acids in a proportion that approaches a complete protein for a plant food, with leucine present in quantities that measurably stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Practical application: 20 to 30 grams per day, preferably in the unsalted version, is sufficient to access the documented package of benefits. Underscore. Food 11. Ezekiel bread. This is the item on the list that surprises people most, especially those who associate bread with simple carbohydrates and inflammation. Ezekiel bread is not conventional bread. It is made from sprouted grains and legumes, wheat, barley, beans, lentils, corn, and soy, without refined flour. The sprouting process is what makes it nutritionally distinct. What happens during sprouting? The natural anti-nutrients in grains, phytates, lectins, enzyme inhibitors, are significantly reduced. The enzymes activated during the sprouting process begin to pre-digest the starches and proteins, making them more bioavailable. The result is a food with a lower glycemic index than conventional bread, with more accessible amino acids and a lower inflammatory load. The combination of sprouted grains and legumes naturally produces an amino acid profile more complete than any of the components individually. What nutrition science calls protein complementarity, the idea that certain combinations of plant foods together produce an amino acid profile closer to the ideal, is structurally built into this bread. Clinical nutrition researchers document that people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity frequently tolerate Ezekiel bread better than conventional breads, precisely because of the reduction of anti-nutrients in the sprouting process. Practical application: it is not easily found in all markets, but it is available in specialty stores and online. And it can be made at home with the right grains and legumes. For those looking for a carbohydrate source with a complementary protein profile and lower glycemic impact, it represents a legitimate alternative. Food 12. Grasshoppers. Until now, everything seemed predictable. From this point on, you will probably be surprised. And it is also the item that, in terms of nutritional rationality and global scientific trends, has the most solid arguments in its favor. Grasshoppers and other edible insects are consumed by more than 2 billion people around the planet, not for lack of alternatives, but because they are objectively a high-quality protein source with characteristics that conventional foods have difficulty replicating. The nutritional profile is impressive. 100 grams of dried grasshoppers contain between 50 and 60 grams of protein, with all essential amino acids present. The fat is predominantly unsaturated. They contain iron, zinc, magnesium, vitamin B12, and omega-3 fatty acids. The bioavailability of amino acids is comparable to that of conventional animal sources. Global nutrition researchers document that the feed conversion efficiency of insects is radically superior to conventional livestock. They need a fraction of the food, water, and space to produce the same amount of protein. This places them in a prominent position in discussions about long-term food sustainability. What is less discussed? Grasshoppers contain chitin, the polysaccharide present in their exoskeleton, which acts as prebiotic fiber in the human digestive tract, feeding beneficial gut bacteria. Preliminary studies suggest that chitin may have a systemic anti-inflammatory effect. Important caveats: people with shellfish or dust mite allergies have an increased risk of allergic reaction to edible insects, as the proteins involved are structurally similar. Introduction should be gradual and cautious. The cultural resistance is real, but the resistance is cultural, not physiological. The body does not distinguish between insect protein and chicken protein. The prejudice is a learned barrier, not a biological truth. 12 foods, 12 protein sources, each one with a different mechanism, with a different entry point into the human body. But there's a pattern that runs through all of them. They are real foods, not processed, not simplified, not stripped of their original components to meet an industrial production convenience. What high-performance protocols have taught is that the human body did not evolve to thrive on simple foods. It evolved with complexity, with variation, with seasonality, with combinations of nutrients that work together in ways that science is still fully mapping. The deterioration that most people experience with aging is not inevitable. It is, in large part, the accumulated consequence of decades of dietary simplification. The body rarely fails suddenly. It whispers for years before it begins to scream. And those whispers, the fatigue that appears without reason, the mental fog after meals, the difficulty recovering after exertion, the sleep that doesn't restore, are signs that something is missing. Usually, what is missing is not complicated. It is consistency with the basics. It is real variety. It is quality protein delivered regularly, informs the body recognizes and can use. How many of those signs is your body already sending? And what if the problem was never your age, but what you put on your plate in recent years? The secret was never hidden. It was simply ignored. Now I want to hear from you. Of these 12 foods, how many are already part of your routine? And which one will you start with first? Write in the comments the word ready, because perhaps this is exactly the message that someone else needed to find today.